Hi, I'm James from Soniccouture. I'm going to be doing a walkthrough of our new product, Moonkits. The idea behind Moonkits was to produce a nice detailed set of brush drum kits. Don't seem to be so many of those around on the market at the moment. We thought it would be really nice to try and get something whereby you could replicate the fantastic swept circular drum snare patterns that you get with brush drumming. It's also important to note that while brushes are clearly all about jazz, we really didn't want to make this product to be a kind of pro-jazz product. We wanted to take in the kind of warm, dusty R&B, urban, hip-hop type styles that you can get with brushes as well, and really experiment with some more unusual drum pieces in the studio, just to come up with a set of really eclectic drum kits. All in all, we set up 5 different kits and we went to Conk Studios in North London. That's Ray Davis from the Kinks studio. It's a kind of medium-sized drum room. It's got a really, really nice drum tone. It's got a fantastic vintage desk. I believe it's a Neve console that was used to record Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. And of course, it's got an incredible collection of vintage mics. So really a dream place to record drums. We spent 3 or 4 days there. 2 different drummers, Adam Faulkner, who's a long-time friend of Soniccouture. He's worked with us on a few projects. He plays with Dido, Baby Shambles, and many, many others. And we also worked for the first time with a guy called Evan Jenkins, who we know through Neil Cowley. He plays with Neil Cowley Trio, and he's got great brush chops and a fantastic collection of vintage kits, and it was a real pleasure to work with him. So we got kind of 2 different drummers' perspective on the brush thing, and of course got to raid their drum collections as well as hiring in extra bits that we needed. The other point I'd really like to make about Moonkits is that we wanted to record everything softly. The thing about brushes is, I think if you whack the drums quite hard with brushes, then they don't sound so very different to sticks. But of course, you know, the traditional brush textures we're used to hearing on a jazz record, well, they're really played incredibly softly. It's just little touches, and we wanted to make sure that we really concentrated on the low end of the dynamic range. Of course, we recorded the full range, but there's really a lot of detail in the soft to medium end of these kits. Now let's get started. I'm going to use the Gretsch kit, which is one of Evan's kits that he brought in. It's a 1950s Gretsch kit. It was in a lovely blue colour. We've got that set up here, and I'm just going to give you a quick run through of the main interface. As you can see, we've got a traditional picture of a drum kit here. All drum instruments need to have this. You can click on different drums to select them if you want. This, I think, is a picture of the Evans Ludwig kit and not the Gretsch. The picture doesn't change according to the kits. We just wanted to keep it simple. So you'll see if we go to the kick drum, you select here, the channel is automatically selected, and this area here on the right of the screen is all dedicated to the kick drum. Right at the top you can select different kick drums here, so you can build your own. We could select, there's a Yamaha Maple 18-inch, a small traditional, very small jazz type kick that's recorded damp and open. There's a Rogers kick, the Gretsch, which is what we're looking at, recorded both damped and open. A Ludwig 22 with a fluffy beater and a wood beater, and a huge great Slingerland 24-inch, which has got a really deep boom on it that belonged to Conk Studios. Anyway, we're going to stick with the Gretsch damped for now. You'll see here you'll see 6 knobs we have, which are the mics, and below we have a bunch of other controls. Let's just focus on the mics for a moment. On the kick drums, we put a mic around the front of the kick, right on the beater, to get get a nice click on that. And actually then we had a mic on the other side of the kick. We've labelled that front because audience perspective, that's the front. We've got bleed, which is the snare mic, so that's great for mixing in a bit of snare rattle. And then all the drums have these 3 ambient mics below. We have an overhead, which were Cole's Ribbons mics, in a traditional overhead position. We also had some Neumann KM86s set up behind the kit, kind of behind the drummer's shoulders, if you can imagine. They sound really great, and we have a traditional ambient room mics, which were Neumann U87s way back on the other side of the room. So let's just play the kick, and I'm going to trigger a pattern from our Euclid sequencer. We'll talk more about that later, but I'll trigger that now. I can solo the kick by clicking on this and holding Alt. That's our kick pattern. So I could let you hear some of the mics now. Let's just zero all of those. Okay, so this is our beta mic. This is the other side of the kick, what we're calling the front. And bleed, snare bleed, we can mix in. Really useful, I find the snare bleed mics, because you can really give a kick some crunch and definition. And that's just the Cole's overhead. You can mix back in a close mic for some context. The rear mic. And then the rooms. You might need to open the decay up a bit. Okay. One thing to note here, you'll see below the ambient mics. This is quite a nice feature here. You can route these out to either one of the 2 bus channels. So if you want a traditional overheads channel, you want all your overheads through one channel, so you can EQ, compress them all together. You can route that to bus 1, or you could choose the other bus. Or you could mix and match, but equally, what I particularly like to be able to do when working with more modern styles is route sometimes route the mic out of the same channel as everything else. So in this case, you would route it to main. You can see it's there. It's now coming out of this channel, and so you could have all your kick mics out of one channel. And you can then compress that. Keep it all together. It's personal choice, and you'll get different results by doing it either way. But it's a nice option to have for sure. Okay, go back to our kick pattern here. Let's take a look at the snares, because snares are kind of a big deal in Moonkits, because that's where the brushes live. So I'm going to turn off that hit at the moment. Which snare are we on here? We're using, it's the Gretsch kit. It's a 14 inch snare, and let's play a swept loop. Here we are in Euclid. You can see this is triggering once per bar. Now, what's great about Moonkits is we recorded each drummer doing a bunch of brush sweep performances on every snare drum. So whichever snare drum you load up, and there's a few choices again. We've got a Pearl Steel 13, Ludwig Acrylite 14, the Gretsch 14, Ludwig 400, and a small Gopay like samba type snare. Whichever one you load up, you'll get a different set of swirls. You can see they're all labelled here in yellow on the keyboard. If we go back to Euclid, you can simply click here and you can see them all listed here by key. So you can pick one there. Anyway, we'll go back to playing it. You can see this is triggering once per bar. This is denoted here, it says 4/4. What's nice is that you can just have that play for half a bar. You can see it stops half a bar, or you can have it really short on an eighth. So you can put in some more hits. Make it longer again so they overlap. Starts to create a rhythm. But, you know, to play the whole loop and hear the natural performance, you'll just have it looping on the bar. Okay, now you can bring in more snare hits. I'm going to turn off the sweep loop for a second. We can just talk about the normal snare loop. We're going to come back to our snare. Let's have that. Maybe that's a little bit hectic for us all to listen to. Okay, we've got one accent, one softer hit there. If we come to our snare mics, let's take a look at them. We're going to zero everything quickly. Okay, we had a top mic. In most cases this was a Josephson side address snare mic, really nice open sound. Traditional under for the wires, this was AKG 414. Okay, and then our overheads. Rear mics are really nice on the snare, make it sound really live, really thrashy. And then the room. Okay. Now what's great with the snare is the amount of expression that we can put in. I'm going to go back and make the pattern a little bit busier for a moment. I'm going to put the kick back in. Okay. What I want to talk about now is the amount of expression you can add. We've got up to 100 velocity layers on a lot of these drums. It's an incredible amount of expression, and that means that if you vary the velocity, if you're playing on a keyboard or on pads or in your sequence, then you're just going to hit a lot of different layers. You're going to get a really natural sound. So what we've done is build in a randomizer. So you can set this down to 0 and you're just going to hit the same velocity layer every time. If you just increase it a little bit, you see we've got a value of 14 there. That's going to move randomly 14 velocity values either way. So you're going to get a very natural sound. Increase it more and you'll hear it getting more random. Probably a bit too much. These kind of values are most interesting. What we can also do is change our curve, so a convex curve, and you're mostly hitting the harder samples, as you can see. It gives you a much harder sound, or if you want a really soft, touchy sound, then you bring it back down here. If you're working with Euclid and you're finding the range between the accent and the soft hits too much, you can reduce the velocity response of the snare drum. This just applies to the snare drum. You can see this has a kind of compression effect. All the quieter hits and the louder hits are much more similar in level. Okay, there's some more functions here that are worth knowing about in the menu. Each drum has its own custom menu here. You can restrict the polyphony if you find your CPU is struggling, 2 or 1 or unlimited. Now the loop speed, this is interesting. It's not something you really need to pay attention to very often, but the loops are synced up here inside Contact using Time Machine. If you were using a really extreme tempo, really fast or really slow, you might start to hear artifacts on the on some of the loops. If that were the case, you could opt to halve the speed of the loop or double it to reduce those artifacts. In practice, I've never had to touch it. Choke, this is really nice. This is a really nice feature. If you've got this switched on, then you'll find that you can set it so that the some of the various push and scrape samples will cut each other off and choke each other like a hi-hat would. And here you can turn round robin on or off if you're maybe trying to do a more modern style and you don't want to hear the variation. Then you might turn that off. But of course, for natural snare patterns, you're going to want it on. Okay, let's come back. Let's get our hat back on. We can build back up. Build back up our Euclid pattern here. Let's talk about the rides a little bit. So, as you can see in Euclid, I mean, you might be familiar with this from electroacoustic or Box of Tricks or Samuel Nori percussion. We've put it in a few products now. It's really popular. It's a really creative tool. For those of you that don't know, I'll do a really quick overview. The principle of Euclidean mathematics is that you can space all events evenly on a bar, no matter what you do. So here, if we have 2 hits, you'll see here, this is one channel across here. This is assigned to a kick. We can have 2 hits, but if we select 9 hits, it's going to space them around the circle evenly. 5 hits. So you see, we can shift that around here, so they occur at different points in the bar. But that's really all there is to it. It's quite straightforward. And what you find is you can build up complex, really natural rhythms quite quickly because everything will stay in time. Doesn't matter what you do. There's our hat coming in. Anyway, that we were going to talk about the rides a little bit. We do have other videos on our site, particularly with electroacoustic, if you'd like a more in-depth overview of the Euclidean beat sequencer. Let's take a look at the rides. So, as I was saying, we've got one channel here assigned to the ride, the bell articulation. But what's flexible about Euclid is that we can assign the channels anywhere we want. So we can have a ride edge as well. Let's just offset those. And we could maybe have one down here too on the middle section of the cymbal. So you can get some nice natural little ride patterns going. Rides sound, some of the rides sound quite heavy. We had a 414 over the rides and it was really picking up a big kind of sub tone to them. We've included all of that. We want to leave all the mics are left completely natural. Really easy to filter this out. On the channel strip we have a filter section with a high pass filter, which is invaluable, and a main filter here which can be switched not just from low pass but into ladder versions of low pass. You can get them resonating, but also band passes, because we're hearing the overheads here as well. So if you wanted to get some creative effects going. We're back to our rides. Again, the same thing applies with the rides, with our performance tools here. And it's really great with the rides to push the random. And you really hear some different hits coming through, like a much more natural performance. Good to reduce the dynamic range. Tweak the mics a little. Okay. We should say a few words about some of the other channel controls here. We could look at that with the ride, because it's incredibly useful when programming drums, just to be able to trim down the decay. Otherwise they can really start to overlap and build up in a pattern. It's not always what you want. We've got tuning on every channel, which can be really useful, just to get parts of your loop in tune with the rest of your track. Adjust the attack. And you can reduce it down to a kind of electronic shaker type sound. We can do some more of that later. On our second page of controls, there's some more filters. Now these filters apply only to the mics. This is distinct from the channel filter, which applies to the whole channel. These are just for the mics, so I'll show you what I mean. But to show you what I mean, I think I'm going to use the kick, because it might be easier to hear what's going on. Okay, there's our kick playing along. Okay, now this is a feature that we introduced in electroacoustic. It's a bit of a power user feature. It's not something you ever need to touch if it freaks you out or if you don't need it, but it's something that I feel can be really powerful for making unusual drum sounds, or really getting forensically into one to edit the mics. So we've got a kick playing. You can see this little grid of numbers here. Now if you go and click, currently I should say, if you use any of these controls, pitch or decay, it affects all the mics at once. All these 6 mics are blended and put through these controls. But if you can edit any of these separately if you want to get really into it. So let's say you think the room mic is decaying a bit too much. You could click 6. You see it selects. We can now trim down the decay of just the room mic. And adjust the envelope there. Maybe we want to roll off the attack a little bit, shorten it a bit, bring it down into line. You can see it gives us a bit of useful kind of controlled ambience. Another thing that you might want to do is go and select one of the direct mics, and again you could really reduce that just down to the click portion. So we can see if we just bring it in there, you can hear we've just got a click. Now you could just tune the click, but you bring in the other mics, they've still got the original tuning there. You could go to this beefy front mic here, really pull that down. So to recap, we've got our beta mic, which we've trimmed down in just a tiny little click, and we've pitched it right up. We've gone to mic 2, we've pitched that down. We could open that up so you really hear that booming. And then on our room mics, we trim down the decay. You could also adjust the velocity response of just a single mic, which is real kind of power user stuff. But if you wanted the beta mic to come through really strongly on soft velocity and hard velocity, then you would reduce the range of that, and you'd always hear that click, whereas everything else responds differently. Okay, hopefully that's given you some insight into these buttons, these edit buttons. As I say, the other thing that you might commonly want to do would be to high pass a single mic. So you'd high pass your click, or low pass it, but you'd want to suck out the low end there. Okay, really powerful feature there. If you wanted to create some more creative, unusual type stuff. Say a little bit more about the channel. As I said, I mentioned the filters. We've got a Contacts Pro compressor. I find it really useful. I really got to know it with electroacoustic on the channel. I was using that so much and hadn't appreciated just how precise you can be with it. Just dialing in a small amount of ratio, you can really tighten up a kick subtly, or you can absolutely slam it. As you can hear. Okay. Transient control, really great, really useful. Just pull down the sustain, deadens up your drums really nicely. Or if you clicks too much, you can soften it off there. An EQ, this is Contacts solid bus EQ. Oh, that shouldn't be set like that. Really useful tool, nothing unusual, but really handy for pulling out some boomy room frequencies or boosting for definition. Saturation, make the sound pop out a little bit more in a mix. Little bit's normally best. And stereo width. When you've got your stereo mics routed through the single channel, then you'll really hear that widen. I'll just route our stereo mics back through the main channel, so you can really hear the channels push apart there, or you can mono it. Okay, let's take a look now at a new kit. This one's got a bit messed up with my demonstrations. So you can see here the presets. You get 80 presets with the product. These are sorted into jazzy brushes here. Studio Moonkits. These are the kits as recorded at Conk as they were set up. So these are really a bit like template files. There's no processing. They're the natural mics. They're the drum kits, all assembled as they were in the studio. You get various options to quick load if you want the snare played with a rod, or kicked, damped kicks, open kicks, etc., etc. And then as a third folder, ignore these little bits. That's just my workings. You get a third folder which is urban and contemporary. So there's some more contemporary kits. You can hear an overview of those in the kits preview video on the web page. But let's pick an example here just to show off some of the more interesting creative possibilities with Moonkits. We have the brush breakbeat. for that to load. Okay. Okay. Now you can see this is running from Beat Shifter, one of the 3 beat tools, distinct from Euclid. Beat Shifter is essentially a basic step sequencer, but with the advantage that you can set a track to jump around bar by bar. I'll show you what I mean. So we've got our open hat here. You can see we've got it hitting just after the snare. But if I set the steps to 2 and put the shift up high, you see it move around. Now we can also adjust the chance of it occurring. You can see this slider here, chance of, that's a new label. So if we reduce that fader, it's going to occur less often. Again, this is great for generating patterns. Now on this edition of Beat Shifter, it's been around a while, it's in a lot of our products and it's always evolving. In this edition we've got some new faders here. Now because of space limitations, you have to access them via this drop down. One new one is chance of a miss. Now what this means by miss is not that you won't hear anything, but that the key will play to either side of the key that you've assigned. So I'll show you what I mean on our hat. We put it on the full. You can hear sometimes it's playing the hat, sometimes it's playing a snare. And we can also, we've also got a new one, a new function which is chance of roll, which is cool. You can hear it rolling on the brush. Rolling with a brush is maybe not exactly what you want. Okay. So we can put in, we've got a floor tom here. This is a good example of what you can do with the shifting. If you put in a sort of a couple of floor tom accents there. Here you get a kind of improvised feel. Now this is all of the beat tools. You can drag the pattern that you're working on into your DAW as a MIDI, which is incredibly useful. There we go. You do that, you're into your DAW and you'll see a MIDI part appear. What's useful with Beat Shifter is that you can tell it how many shifted bars you want to export. So if you type 4, you'll get 4 revolutions of the bar with the specified shift parameters each time. So you get 1, 2, 3. You see these have moved. So when you drag that out, you'll see the shifts there. So that's another new feature for Beat Shifter. Really useful. You could specify that all the way up to 128, and you'll have a full-on odyssey of improvised drums. Let's take a look at some of the other kits, contemporary kits. Let's try. There's a few kind of drum and bass kits here which are good for any kind of breakbeat style, and they show what you can do by really playing with the envelope controls. I'm going to want to adjust our tempo here, I think. Let's put it up to a really fast tempo. But you can see what's really cool using 3 shortened hits of a sweep loop and a brush snare, so you get a really modern sound. You can shorten off the hats. There's a ride sample in it. Okay, another kit. Let's look at some of the jazz kits. Particular favourite of mine is the Ludwig Shuffler. I think this has got quite a modern trip-hoppy type sound while still being distinctly a brushed kit. I'm going to need to adjust the tempo to something a bit more brooding, I think. Let's have a look at the master processing. Might want to beef up that output for you. That's a good excuse to look at the output. We've got this is the master strip. We've got a choice of 2 compressors in the first slot. You can have the solid bus comp, which is the Contact SSL model, or you can have the feedback comp, which is what we've got here. What's nice is it has a mix control. So parallel compression, we'll just set it right up. You can really push it. It's got a great sound, this compressor. Again, you've got solid EQ here. Just useful for sweetening up. You can see we've dialed down some 550 Hertz there. Cleans things up again. Contact's tape compressor. It's not the most comprehensive tape effect on the market, but it can be quite nice. You can hear there. You can push it till it breaks up a little bit. It's also quite useful for just rolling off the high end. And then Contact's limiter, really just there to give yourself a bit of level or just to stop it clipping. Nothing too creative there, but a nice kit all the same. Let's take a little tour through the studio Moonkits. Kit 1, this was we had Adam Faulkner in the studio first. This was the first kit we set up, and I've called it the Oddity Kit because we did quite a lot of unusual things here. Adam had the idea of using a upturned kick drum as a floor tom, and there was a large snare drum with no snares as a rack tom. Stuff like that. It just gives you subtly different drum sounds that you don't normally get. Okay. Just boost the level here. See, these studio kits are left unprocessed. These are the raw mics you're hearing here. Here's our pattern. You can hear the sweep loop here. It works really nicely, I think. You can just turn that off. Okay, this hi-hat's interesting. So Zildjian jungle hat, and it's got bells mounted around the centre, so you get a kind of tambourine type. Make that pattern slightly more busy, shall we? Now that's the pedal articulation. If we switch that to the closed hat, you're going to hear that get a bit more tambourine-y. adjust the curve. One thing about the hi-hats, which is worth mentioning when editing the hi-hats, you get the option, which I'm really grateful that we've finally thought of adding. You get the option of closed hat decay and open hat decay. So if you wanted to have a busier hat pattern, let's put it on 1/8 there. And you wanted to tighten up your closed hat sound, you can see you can leave the open hat untouched. You can close it down a bit if you want. Down to a normal level. What about the hat articulations? You'll only find in the list of articulations of keys, you'll find 4. You'll find closed, pedal, open, and half hat. Now that I know that on some libraries, particularly NI Abbey Road, you get a whole raft of different articulations mapped to different keys. Don't be fooled by the number of articulations there. They are in fact really expressive because we've got so many layers. As I say, we've got up to 100 layers on a hat. What you'll find is that on the closed hat, at the lower velocity levels, it's played at the top of the hat with with the tip of the stick. As we get up towards the harder end, it's played with the shank on the edge. So you really get. Let's see if I can show you an example of what I mean. If we maybe pick out another hat, let's see, let's pick out this. Oh, that's really dry sounding. This is an interesting hat. I should say a tiny little 10-inch hat, which sounds like it's been pitched up, but it's pretty cool. As with all the hats, they're going to need brightening up. But you can hear, if we put in some accents, so that's 2 levels you're hearing there. It's just soft and hard. If we put so hopefully you can hear there. You can hear with the softer hit is the tip, and on the top it gets a lot more clanky. Pretty expressive, and that's down to a randomize function here. If you can hear it becomes a lot more static if we turn that down. Okay, let's move on to the next kit. I'm sure we'll find some other things to talk about as we get through. That was Oddity kit. Adam also brought in the Rogers Holiday kit. Let's have a listen to that. Let's listen to it played with rods. We haven't talked about rods yet. With most of the snares, you get brushes, I think, on all the snares except one. And then you get rods, mallets, a percussion mallet. Adam had a really interesting tool that he developed himself, which he called a beater brush. So it's your conventional brush, but he'd taken the head of a fluffy percussion beater and he'd pushed that onto the brush so that was around the shank of the brush. So if you're playing a ride or a snare, you get the brush and the beater head would hit at the same time. So you get a kind of that soft brushy attack, but you also get some weight from the brush. That was nice. This is the Rogers Holiday kit. Bump that up a bit. That's just our close mics. This is where you hear the overheads. You can hear with rods they've got a really spiky sound. You can hear some of the variation here on the snare. Some of the different tones possible with the mics. I think we're hearing some rim clicks here on the floor tom. Some of the toms we sampled this rim click sound as well as centre and edge of the skin. You get this stick on the edge of the rim, which is a really nice sound. And again, a lot of layers. So you get a lot of variation if you put up the random. Almost plays like it almost starts to sound musical. You can hear a real thump there from the bottom of the floor tom. You might want to filter that out. Okay, another kit. Evan's first kit was the Gretsch kit. Well, we looked at that. Let's have a look at the Ludwig 1964. This sounds particularly nice with snares off with brushes. You've got brushes, snares on and off. You've also got mallets on this one, you see. But let's take a look with the snares off. Snares off doesn't tend to sound that great with sticks, but with a brush you get a lot more definition from the brush itself, I think. Okay, that's nice. Let's just go. Okay, listen to that snare. Turn down some of the room mics. You can hear the detail. Turn off the sweep loop a second. So you can hear, if we go down to the softer hits, down here in the velocity range, really nice because you're hearing the brushy attack, and then that kind of congery type thunk of the snare drum without any snare wires on. Again, this is playing so quietly, really quiet hits, but totally usable in Moonkits. Nice hat. This is Zildjian brush hat. You can hear some of the expression coming through in the hat there as well, which is pretty good going when you've only got a normal and accent coming out of Euclid. These rear KM86s really just give everything a lot of kind of stereo life. Widen that up. What a great sound. Okay, let's check out a couple more kits. In the studio kits, that was the Ludwig. Let's have a little listen to the Ludwig with some mallets. Mallets can be kind of subtle. I mean, it really just rolls off you know, you imagine rolling off the attack of the stick. It's not always. It's not always completely recognisable as, oh, that's a mallet, but again it does something slightly different. Nice on rides. Let's just route everything in the ride through one channel so we can hear what's happening. Listen to some of the different layers. That's nearly disappeared, so we just reduced the velocity range here. You can hear it get really, really gong-like. Just filter out some of the low end. Use a filter and really get a gong-like sound. Some of the rides have some interesting ride tones here. At the end of the list here you'll see, let's just turn that off. At the end of the list you'll see the spiral. If you check out the website you'll see some pictures. It's one of those big tall 6 foot of kind of shredded cymbal hanging on a pole. And that's played with brush and stick. So there's Zildjian with the beta is really nice. Again, as I mentioned, there's some really low-end tones in these cymbals. Often need to filter out. Some more rides, some very different ride tones, some really interesting different cymbals. Sounds absolutely enormous, as you can hear. We're only playing really softly here. Smaller 18-inch ride. And a stick, if you want a traditional ride sound. There is one played with a stick. Okay. That was our Ludwig mallet kit. Okay, let's take a look at the last studio Moonkit as we set it up. It's Moonkit 5. Now this was kind of a mongrel kit. Adam came back in. We used some of the bits that he'd brought. He brought a lot of stuff, but also Conk Studio had a really nice Slingerland kit with a huge 24-inch kick drum, which has got real bottom end on it, and also this, as I say, this really interesting 10-inch hi-hat, which is quite high pitched. So we combined that with a T-tail snare for a really, really damped, dry snare sound, and it's a really interesting kit. Let's have a listen. Check out that kick. If I turn up the front mic, you should really hear some low end. Seriously dry snare. And this is that 10-inch hat. As you can see, pitch knob, totally flat. And instead of toms on this kit, we used timbalos. Yeah, it's certainly a really creative kit, and as I say, what's really interesting about Moonkits and what's so flexible is that you can just build your own kit. So you can choose the Slingerland kit for kick drum, but then you can choose any of the snares. You can have the Ludwig Acrolite with snares off. You can pick any hat. That's the mini Sabian, the 10-inch, but you can go for this 15-inch. You can pick out your rides, your floor tom, totally flexible. It's a really great drum product. I'm loving playing with it. I'm sure you will too. It just sounds a bit different. It's really expressive. It's got so much detail in it. I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone thinks of it. Thanks.